I raised my little brother for 6 years while my parents worked abroad. When they came home, they told him I was just the babysitter. 6 years of school runs, doctor visits, homework, and everything in between. Then my parents came back and erased all of it. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 32 years old. When I was 22, my parents left for Dubai and handed me my 11-year-old brother. Not officially. There was no signed document, no formal arrangement, no conversation where anyone used words like guardian or responsibility transfer. Just my mother at the door with her carry-on bag saying, "You know where everything is. We'll call Sunday." And then they were gone. That was 6 years before my story really begins. 6 years of school runs and doctor visits and parent-teacher conferences and grocery lists and disciplinary conversations and middle-of-the-night fevers. 6 years of raising a child who was not my child. When my parents came home, my mother looked around the house and said, "It looks good in here." Not "thank you." Not "we owe you everything." Not "we know what this cost you." Just, "It looks good in here." And when I finally pushed back, when I finally said out loud what those 6 years had actually taken from me, my father looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "We didn't ask you to sacrifice anything. That was your choice." I walked out of that house. My parents told my brother I was being dramatic and selfish. My brother, Caleb, the boy I raised, stopped calling. That silence is the part I'm still learning to carry. This is the story of what happens when you give 6 years of your life for people who were always going to call it nothing. My family is from Atlanta. My parents, Gerald and Diane Webb, grew up here, built their lives here, raised me here. My father is an electrical engineer. Spent 20 years working for a utility company in the city. Good career, stable income, no complaints. My mother is an accountant. Sharp, organized, the kind of person who has a system for everything. For most of my childhood, she worked at a firm downtown. I am the oldest. Caleb came along when I was 11 years old. I remember the day my parents brought him home from the hospital. He was red and wrinkled and furious about being in the world, and I thought he was the most interesting thing I had ever seen. Growing up, we were close in the way siblings with an age gap can be close. I was protective of him. I helped with homework when he was struggling. I was the brother who showed up to his little league games when our parents had to work late. I went to Georgia State for undergrad. Business administration. Did well. Graduated at 22 with a solid GPA and a clear plan. 2 years of work experience. Then a master's program in supply chain management at a school in the Northeast. I had already identified 3 programs. Had already started drafting applications. That was the plan. The summer I graduated, my father came to me with an opportunity. A large infrastructure firm was offering him a 3-year contract in Dubai. Senior engineering role. The kind of money that doesn't come around twice. My mother had been offered a corresponding remote consulting contract that would let her work from abroad with a Middle Eastern firm. "We're thinking seriously about taking it," my father said. "That's a huge move," I said. "It is, but the financial upside is significant. We'd be able to pay off the house, fund retirement properly, maybe help you and Caleb with graduate school down the line." "What about Caleb?" My father was quiet for a moment. "Caleb is 11. He's in a good school. He has his friends here. His whole life is here. We don't want to uproot him and take him to Dubai for 3 years. The schooling situation is complicated and expensive over there. So what are you thinking? We were hoping you'd be willing to stay here with him, just for the contract period. 3 years. You'd be here in the house. Caleb keeps his school, his friends, his routine. You'd have the house, the car, full financial support, everything paid. We'd send an allowance on top of that for your time." I was 22 years old. I had a plan. Graduate school applications were half drafted on my laptop. But I also looked at my 11-year-old brother and thought, 3 years. It's 3 years. And he's Caleb. "How much is the allowance?" I asked. My father named a number. It was not nothing. But it was not what a childcare professional would have been paid to do what they were asking. "And you'll be back in 3 years," I said. 3 years. Maximum. "Okay," I said. "I'll stay." My mother hugged me. My father shook my hand. They told me I was responsible and mature and that they were proud of me. 6 weeks later, they were on a plane to Dubai. I was 22 years old, alone in a house in Atlanta, responsible for an 11-year-old boy. The first months were an education in everything I didn't know. I knew how to be Caleb's brother. I did not know how to be his everything else. The school forms asked for a parent or guardian signature. I was neither, legally. I called my parents, and my father handled a notarized letter giving me the authority to act on Caleb's behalf for school matters. It took 3 weeks to sort out and involved more faxing than any 22-year-old should have to do. There were other bureaucratic surprises. His pediatrician needed parental authorization for routine appointments. I had to get a second letter for that. The school's emergency card listed my parents as primary contacts, phone numbers that rang 7,000 miles away during business hours in a different time zone. I updated the cards with my number. I became the contact. I became the person the school called when there was a problem, a question, a form to sign. I got a job, a logistics coordinator position at a distribution company in Marietta. Decent pay, regular hours, close enough to home that I could be back for Caleb by 5 o'clock most days. It was not the graduate school stepping stone job I had planned. It was the job that let me be home. I learned to cook properly in those first months, out of pure necessity. Before, I could manage a handful of things adequately. Now I had an 11-year-old who needed a real dinner on the table at a reasonable hour, not reheated takeout or cereal. Because a kid without a proper dinner is a kid who can't focus on homework and can't sleep right and wakes up already behind. I learned to plan meals for the week. Learned to grocery shop with a real list. Learn the difference between a Tuesday that runs smoothly because I prepared it right and a Tuesday that falls apart because I didn't think ahead. I learned Caleb's teachers' names. Learned which of his friends were good influences and which ones were not. Learned that he needed a snack immediately after school or his mood deteriorated fast. Learned that he processed hard days by going quiet for an hour before he was ready to talk, and that the worst thing I could do was push him before that hour was up. I learned him. The way you learn someone when you are actually there every day. My parents called twice a week, on Wednesdays and Sundays. The calls were warm and consistent. They asked about Caleb's school, his grades, his moods. They asked briefly about me. The calls lasted about 20 minutes. I managed more of Caleb's life in a single Tuesday than those calls ever touched. I want to be precise about that, because it matters to the story. My parents were not absent in spirit. They loved Caleb. The calls were real. The concern was genuine. The money arrived reliably every month. I am not describing neglect. I am describing the specific, enormous gap between loving someone from a distance and being the person physically present for every unremarkable and crucial moment of a child's daily life. Between asking how school is going and sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday night, helping untangle a pre-algebra concept that isn't clicking. Between calling on Sunday and being the one at the school on a Friday afternoon when a teacher says there has been a situation and can someone come in. That gap is not small. That gap is where most of childhood actually lives. Year 1 passed. Year 2 passed. By the end of year 2, Caleb was 13 and I was 24, and we had developed a genuine rhythm. Not comfortable. Exactly. There is nothing comfortable about being a 24-year-old managing a household and a teenager while your peers are building careers and making the impulsive decisions available only to people without dependence. But functional. We had worked out the shape of our days together. The routines that held. The shorthand that develops between two people who share a lot of hours in the same house. He was funny by that point. Genuinely funny, in a dry observational way that belonged entirely to him and to no one else in our family. I like to think I gave him the space for that particular version of himself to develop. No pressure, no competing agenda, just the room to figure out who he was. I was 24, still telling myself graduate school was next year. The 3-year contract became a 4-year contract extension. My father called to tell me, apologetically, that the firm had offered terms that were very difficult to turn down. I know this is more than we asked, he said, but you're doing an incredible job. Caleb is thriving, and we'll make it right when we're home. Marcus, we will. Okay, Dad. How are you holding up? I'm fine. I was not entirely fine, but I was managing, and I didn't see what saying otherwise would accomplish from 7,000 miles away. There was no version of that phone call where me admitting the full weight of it actually helped anything. My father was not going to fly home because I said I was tired and behind on my own life. So I said I was fine and I kept going. I had deferred graduate school applications twice by this point. The programs I had identified were still there, still accepting applications. I kept the draft essays on my laptop, opened them occasionally, told myself, next year, after the contract, when things settle. Things did not settle. That is almost always how it goes. Things do not settle on their own. They settle when you force them to, or they don't settle at all. I kept waiting for a natural break in the action, and the natural break never came, because the action was a child growing up, and children growing up do not pause for a convenient moment. Year 3. Caleb was 14. Deep in the particular turbulence of being 14, moody, occasionally defiant, testing every boundary he could find. Not unusual, but not easy either. I was the one in the house. I was the one who set the boundaries and enforced them and absorbed the pushback when he didn't like them. I remember a specific night that fall. Caleb had come home an hour past his curfew. Phone off. No explanation. I had been sitting in the living room for 60 minutes running through scenarios that got progressively worse. When he walked in, I was so relieved I almost forgot to be angry. Almost. We had it out. He pushed back hard. Said I wasn't his parent. Said he didn't have to listen to me. Said things that landed in the specific way that only words from someone you love can land. I didn't yell. I told him, quietly, that as long as he was in this house and I was responsible for him, he would follow the rules. That the rules existed because I loved him and because I would not be able to live with myself if something happened to him on my watch. He went to his room, slammed the door. An hour later, he came back out and sat on the couch next to me. Sorry, he said. I know, I said. We watched television together for 2 hours without talking about it again. That was enough. That's how it worked between us. That's what 6 years of daily presence builds. I called my parents that Sunday and gave them a brief, sanitized version of the curfew incident. My father said, "Sounds like you handled it well." My mother said, "He's just being a teenager." Then we moved on to other things. In year 4, I started dating someone. Her name was Deja. She was a graphic designer, funny and grounded, and exactly the kind of person I would have pursued more aggressively if I hadn't been managing a household and a teenager simultaneously. We dated for about 8 months. She was patient about the constraints on my time. Patient about the fact that any plans we made had to fit around Caleb's schedule. Patient about the fact that I could rarely be spontaneous and never truly off-duty. She was patient until she said one evening, sitting across from me at a restaurant, "I really like you, Marcus, but I don't know how to be with someone who isn't actually available." "I'm here right now," I said. "Your phone has been face up on the table this whole dinner," she said, "because Caleb might need something." She wasn't wrong. We ended things respectfully. She's married now, from what I can tell. Has a daughter. Looks happy in the photos. I went home after that dinner and checked in on Caleb, who was asleep, and sat at the kitchen table for a while thinking about the cost of things. You don't always feel the accumulation in real time. You feel it in small moments. A relationship that couldn't grow because the conditions weren't right. A graduate school application gathering digital dust on a laptop. A Friday night spent at home because there was no one else to be there. A friend's birthday gathering you missed because Caleb had something going on that needed handling. A career move you turned down because it would have required relocating away from Atlanta. Small moments, quiet and individual, that stack into something heavier than any single one of them suggests. I kept a running list, at some point, of things I had said no to because of the situation. Not deliberately, not as a grievance journal, but just because the no's accumulated and my brain held on to them. Frank from my office, who moved to Chicago for a better role and asked if I might be interested. A weekend trip to New York with college friends that I bailed on twice and then stopped being invited to. A volunteer coaching position with a youth basketball program that I had to give up after one season because the schedule became incompatible with Caleb's. Each individual no was reasonable. Each one made sense in context. Added together, they formed the outline of a life I had not lived. I never stopped telling myself it was worth it, because Caleb was worth it. That was always true and remains true. But worth it and free are two different things. What you give willingly is still given. The willingness does not make it cost nothing. I think people sometimes confuse those two things, think that because someone made a choice without being forced, The cost is somehow not real. The cost is real. It was real when I incurred it, and it remains real now that it is behind me. Year 5. Caleb was 16, starting to look at colleges, asking questions about the future with the earnest urgency of someone who can almost see it. We talked a lot that year. Long kitchen table conversations after dinner, the kind I didn't have the bandwidth for during the harder years. Talked about what he wanted to study, what kind of city he wanted to live in, what kind of person he was trying to become. I was 27. He was 16. We sat at that kitchen table like two people who had been through something together, because we had. I remember him saying once, out of nowhere, "You're the most consistent person in my life, you know." I didn't know what to do with that. I said, "I just showed up." "That's the thing, though," he said. "You just showed up. Every day." I thought about that a lot afterward. About what it means to simply show up, day after day, without drama or announcement. About how that accumulates into something. About how that accumulation is its own kind of love. My parents called that Sunday. My mother asked how the college search was going. I walked her through the list of schools Caleb was considering, the range of programs, the financial aid landscape. She listened attentively. "You've done a wonderful job with him," she said. "He did a wonderful job with himself," I said. "I was just here." I meant it as a deflection. I didn't know it would become their language. My parents came home 14 months later. Caleb had just turned 17. I was 28. They arrived on a Friday afternoon in October. Gerald and Diane Webb, tanned and energized, carrying premium luggage and the easy confidence of people who had done well abroad and knew it. The house looked good. I had made sure of it. Not for them. I hadn't even consciously thought of it that way, just because maintaining the house was one of the things I did, had always done, for 6 years. My mother walked through the rooms and said, "It looks good in here." "Thanks," I said. My father shook my hand and clapped me on the shoulder. Caleb was at a friend's house. He came home an hour later, and the reunion with my parents was warm and joyful and slightly disorienting to watch. They embraced him like people who had been starving for it, and he hugged them back with the real warmth of someone who had genuinely missed his parents, even while managing mostly without them. I stood in the doorway of the living room and watched and felt something that took me a while to name. Not jealousy, not resentment, something quieter. I felt like a contractor who had built a house and was now watching the owners move in. The first 2 weeks were adjustment. My parents and I orbited each other politely while they relearned the rhythms of the house and reasserted their presence in Caleb's daily life. I expected some of that. I tried to be generous about it. But there were moments. My mother rescheduling Caleb's orthodontist appointment without telling me and booking it over a conflict I had already arranged. Small, but it stung. My father undoing a grounding I had put in place for a missed curfew, telling Caleb it was fine to go out without so much as a conversation with me about it. I brought that one up. "Dad," I grounded him for a reason. "He missed his curfew by 40 minutes with his phone off. We have a standing rule about that. He's 17, Marcus. He doesn't need a curfew like a little kid. He's been on a curfew for 4 years. It's been working. Well, we're home now. Things can loosen up. I'm not asking you to keep every rule exactly as I had it. I'm asking you to talk to me before you undo things in front of him. It undermines the structure we've built." My father looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not angry. Something flatter than angry. "The structure you built," he said. "Yes. Marcus, we appreciate everything you did. But we're his parents. We're home now. The structure going forward is ours to set. I understand that. I'm just asking for a conversation before you change things. You don't need to be consulted on parenting decisions about our son." I let it go that night. I went to my room, still my room, in the house I had run for 6 years, and I sat with the feeling. The following month was more of the same. A gradual, consistent erosion of every boundary and routine I had spent years establishing. I am not unreasonable. I understood that my parents were home and that their authority over Caleb was genuine and primary. I was not trying to hold a parental role that wasn't mine. What I was trying to do was raise a concern like an adult in a household where I had been functioning as an adult for 6 years. What I kept running into was the sense that my 6 years were being treated as a house-sitting stint, like I had watered the plants and forwarded the mail. The breaking point came over something specific. Caleb was caught shoplifting a jacket from a department store at the mall. He was with two friends. The store called me. I was still listed as his emergency contact because the records hadn't been updated, and I went down to handle it. The store declined to involve the police given his clean record and his age. I was grateful for that. I drove him home in silence. At home, I sat him down. I told him I wasn't going to lecture him at length because he was 17 and smart enough to understand what he had done. I told him there would be consequences, 2 weekends at home, no car access, and he was going to write a letter of apology to the store manager and deliver it in person. He agreed. He seemed genuinely embarrassed, which I took as a good sign. My father came home that evening. I told him what had happened and what I had decided. He listened, and then he said, "That sounds like an overreaction. He made a mistake. Kids make mistakes." I know. That's why he's writing a letter and staying in on weekends, not facing anything criminal. You're not his parent, Marcus. You don't set consequences for him. I have been setting consequences for him for 6 years. And we're home now, so you don't need to do that anymore. Dad, I found out about it. I handled it at the store. I drove him home. What was I supposed to do? Call you from the parking lot and wait for instructions? What you're supposed to do is let us parent our child. That's what I've been doing for 6 years while you were in Dubai. The sentence landed differently than I expected. The room went very quiet. My mother came in from the other room. She had heard more than either of us realized. "Marcus," she said carefully, "we understand you feel like you gave up a lot, and we're grateful. But you have to understand, we made those financial sacrifices so the family could be in a better position. We paid for this house, this car, Caleb's school, all of it. You were here, and that was a contribution, and we value it. But we paid for everything." "You sent money," I said. "That's not the same thing as being here. We provided for this family. I provided for Caleb. Every day, in every way that doesn't show up in a wire transfer. The 3 a.m. asthma attacks. The week he was suspended from school, and I had to figure out why and whether it would affect his academic record. The 2 months he was certain he was being bullied, and we had to work through that together. The college visits I took him on because he needed someone to drive him. None of that is in your bank statements." My mother looked genuinely uncomfortable. I thought for a moment she might acknowledge it. "We appreciate all of that," she said. "We do. But you did it willingly. Nobody held a gun to your head, Marcus. You chose to stay. You asked me to stay. And you said yes. You were an adult. You made a choice. I was 22 years old, and you were asking me to take your 11-year-old son off your hands so you could take a lucrative contract abroad. That's not a fair characterization. What's the fair one?" My father stepped forward. His voice had gone very even in the way it goes when he has decided something. "I'm going to say this once. We did not ask you to sacrifice your life. We asked you to help out, and we paid you to do it, and you made your own choices about what else to give beyond that. We are not responsible for a graduate degree you chose not to pursue or relationships you chose not to maintain. That's on you. We gave you everything you needed to live your life alongside taking care of Caleb. What you chose to sacrifice beyond that, that was your decision. And you don't get to come back now and make us feel guilty for it." I stood there for a moment. I thought about the graduate school applications on my laptop, the deferred plans. Deja is sitting across from me with my phone face up on the table. Frank, the guy from my office who had moved to Chicago for a better job and asked if I wanted to come along, and the way I had said no without even really considering it because I couldn't leave Atlanta. I thought about 6 years of school runs at 7 in the morning, about a 14-year-old slamming a door at me and coming back an hour later to say sorry, about being listed as guardian on forms that parents usually sign. I thought about Caleb at the kitchen table saying, "You just showed up every day?" "Okay," I said. I went to my room. I packed a bag. I told my mother I was going to stay with a friend for a while. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. I left. I crashed with my friend Derek for 2 weeks while I sorted out an apartment. It wasn't graceful, but it was mine. I thought about Caleb the entire time. He called me twice in that first week. Brief, cautious calls. I could hear the confusion in his voice, and underneath the confusion, something more careful, the particular carefulness of a kid who has been told a version of something and isn't sure yet what to do with it. "What happened? What's going on?" Me and your parents had a hard conversation. I needed some space. They said you were being dramatic. I took a breath. I think we see things differently. That's between me and them. It has nothing to do with us. It doesn't feel like nothing. I know. I'm sorry it feels that way. I'm not going anywhere, Caleb. I just needed to not be in that house right now. He seemed to accept that, mostly. We talked for a few more minutes. Kept it light. He told me something about a college visit he was planning. I asked questions. We were normal, or close enough to normal to count. But as the weeks passed, the calls got shorter and less frequent. I could feel the distance being constructed, not by Caleb himself, exactly, not from any decision he made deliberately, but by the environment around him, by the narrative taking shape in the house I had left, by the version of events that was told and retold until it settled into something like fact. I found out through a cousin that my mother had told family members I had walked out over a disagreement about discipline and was refusing to come back out of pride, that I was jealous of their homecoming, that I had always needed to be the center of attention and couldn't stand that they were back and things had shifted. None of that is accurate, but I understand why that version is easier. It makes me the problem. It makes their homecoming something I complicated rather than something that was complicated by how it was handled. It is a cleaner story if you don't know the full one. The full one is that I ran their household for 6 years and asked for nothing beyond the allowance they sent. And when I finally named what it had cost me, my father told me I didn't get to make them feel guilty for choices I had made freely. That is the full one. But that version requires acknowledging something about themselves that they are apparently not ready to acknowledge. By the time a month had passed, Caleb's calls had stopped entirely. Not a dramatic silence, not a declared cutoff. Just the gradual accumulation of unanswered calls becoming unreturned texts, becoming an absence that settled in where a relationship used to be. I sent him messages. Not daily. I did not want to pressure him or make him feel caught in the middle in a way that made things harder for him. But regularly. Consistent and low pressure. A meme he would have appreciated. A check-in. A mention of something I knew he was working toward. I kept the thread open because I wanted him to know the door was there whenever he was ready to walk through it. He read them. I could see that. The little indicator showing a message had been seen. He read them and did not reply. That is the part one carry most heavily. Not my parents' dismissal. I can hold that, even though it hurts. It confirms something I had sensed in the background of our relationship for years. The particular way they've always understood my reliability as a feature rather than a sacrifice, as something I simply was rather than something I chose and kept choosing. The silence from Caleb is different, because Caleb knows. He was there. He lived those 6 years with me. He knows who showed up for the hard nights. He knows who was in the waiting room. He knows who drove him to his first varsity game and sat in the stands alone. I do not know exactly what version of events has been filling the house since I left. I know only that a 17-year-old is still largely shaped by the people in his immediate orbit, by the story he hears most consistently, by the version of things that surrounds him every day. That is not weakness. That is 17. I hold on to the version of him that sat at the kitchen table late on a Tuesday night and said you just showed up every day. I believe that version is still in there, underneath everything. I believe it is paying attention. I have to believe that. Not because I need to be right about it, but because it is the only thing that makes the waiting make sense. I got my apartment in November. 1-bedroom in Decatur, a neighborhood I have always liked for its specific quality of feeling like Atlanta, but slightly apart from it. Small but clean and entirely, fully mine in a way that nothing has been mine in a long time. The first weekend in the apartment, I woke up on a Saturday morning with no obligation to be anywhere or do anything for anyone else. I lay in bed for an extra 45 minutes just because I could. That sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing when you have not done it in 6 years. I bought furniture gradually. Nothing extravagant. A proper bed frame. A couch I actually chose myself. A coffee maker that takes longer than the old one, but makes better coffee. Small acts of building something that belonged to me. I signed up for a graduate program in the spring. Supply chain management at Georgia Tech this time. A different school than the ones I had identified at 22, but a stronger program, honestly, and one whose evening format actually works around a full-time job. The kind of thing I can see leading somewhere real. I applied for a position at a larger logistics firm, an operations manager role that is a genuine step up from the logistics coordinator work I have been doing for 6 years. I put together the strongest application I could. I got the job. I started in January. The commute is slightly longer. The work is considerably more challenging and considerably more interesting. I am rebuilding. That is the honest word for it. Not from zero. I am 32, not 22, and I have skills and maturity and a clarity about what I value that I simply did not have at 22. But rebuilding. Starting the chapter that was supposed to start 10 years ago, starting it now instead, with more scar tissue and more wisdom and considerably less patience for situations where what I give is not seen clearly for what it is. There is something freeing about that impatience, actually, about knowing your own worth with the specificity that comes from having tested it against hard years. I will never again agree to something without understanding what I am agreeing to. I will never again wait for acknowledgement from people who have decided not to give it. I will never again call myself just fine when I am not fine, because protecting someone else from the truth of my situation has never once served me well. My parents have reached out twice since I left. My mother called about 3 weeks after I moved out. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said she thought things had gotten out of hand, and she wished it had gone differently. She did not say she was sorry. She did not acknowledge what 6 years had cost me. She said she hoped we could move forward. I said I hoped so too, and left it at that. My father sent a text 2 months later. It said, "Hope the new place is working out. Caleb asks about you sometimes." That last sentence was either an olive branch or a calculated wound, and I have not yet decided which. I replied, "Glad to hear it. He knows how to reach me." I have not heard from either of them since. I have a therapist now, something I probably should have started years ago, but there was never room for it when I was deep in the middle of everything. Now there is room. We talk about the specific weight of having been essential and invisible at the same time, about the way love and resentment can occupy the same space without canceling each other out, about what it means to have done a genuinely good thing and have it go unacknowledged by the very people whose acknowledgement would have meant the most. She introduced me to a concept early on that I found useful, the idea that grief does not require death, that you can grieve a decade of your own life the same way you grieve a person, that the loss of the years, the plans, the relationships, the version of your 30s you had imagined, those losses are real, and treating them as real rather than pushing them aside as self-pity is actually the healthier thing. I had been doing a lot of self-pity avoidance for years, telling myself I had chosen this, telling myself it was worth it. Both of those things are true. Neither of them means there is nothing to grieve. She asked me once whether I regretted staying, whether I wished I had said no at 22 and gotten on with my own plans. I sat with that for a long time before I answered. No, I said finally. Not because of what it cost me, but because of who Caleb is. He's a good person. He's going to be a good man. And I was part of building that. That's not nothing. That will never be nothing. Can that be enough? She asked. Can that be the whole answer? I don't know yet, I said. I'm still figuring that out. She nodded, did not push. That is one of the things I appreciate about her. That's where I am, still figuring it out, still sitting with the complicated truth that I can be proud of what I gave and also grieve what it cost me. That both things are real, that neither one cancels the other. Still waiting for a text back from a 17-year-old who I taught to make scrambled eggs and drove to his first high school party and sat within a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning when he broke his wrist at a skate park and was trying not to cry because he thought he was too old to cry in front of me. I let him cry. I told him it was fine to cry. I told him being tough and being able to feel things aren't in conflict with each other, that the strongest people he would ever meet are the ones who feel things deeply and choose to keep going anyway. I hope he remembers that. I hope, when the noise around him settles, he remembers that there was someone who said that to him at 2 in the morning in a fluorescent waiting room and meant every word of it. I'm not angry at Caleb. I want to be clear about that. He is 17. He is in a house with 2 parents who are telling him a story, and he doesn't yet have the distance or the framework to interrogate that story the way an adult could. That's not weakness. That's just 17. I am angry at my parents. Not with the hot, immediate anger of the argument in the kitchen. With something cooler and more settled. The anger of someone who understands clearly what happened and is not going to pretend otherwise. They made a decision that prioritized their financial advancement over their son's childhood stability. They made that decision easier on themselves by asking me, an adult child with his own plans and his own future, to absorb the cost. I agreed. I was 22 and I loved my brother, and I believed them when they said 3 years. I am not asking them to feel guilty for the rest of their lives. I am not asking for a ceremony or a monument. I am asking for acknowledgement, for a clear-eyed recognition that what I did was more than babysitting, that what it cost me was real, and that a simple thank you, one that doesn't come packaged with a dismissal, would not be unreasonable. They are not capable of that, apparently, or they are capable of it and choose not to. Either way, the result is the same. I am 32 years old. I have a small apartment and a new job and a graduate program starting in the fall and a therapist I see every other Thursday. I have friends who have been steadier than I gave them credit for. I have a clearer understanding of my own worth than I had when I was 22 and said yes to something without fully counting the cost. I am going to be okay. I know that with confidence. Not the performed confidence of someone trying to seem fine, but the real kind. The kind that comes from having gotten through the hard years and come out still standing. I think about Caleb most days. I think about who he's becoming, about whether he's eating properly, because he has always had a tendency to skip lunch when he's stressed, about whether he's getting real sleep or staying up too late on his phone, about the college decisions coming and whether he has someone who will sit with him through the weight of that. I think about whether my parents, now that they are home and present, will give him the daily texture of care that I gave him for 6 years. I genuinely hope they do. Not because I want credit for setting the standard, because I want Caleb to have what he needs. He deserves that. He has always deserved that. I left a note for him when I moved out, slid it under his bedroom door the morning I left, before he was awake. It said, "Nothing about us has changed. I'm a phone call away. Whenever you're ready, I'm there. Take care of yourself the way I taught you." I don't know if he kept it. I don't know if he read it more than once or threw it away or tucked it somewhere. But I wrote it. I said the thing. I left the door open as wide as I could on my way out. That's all I can do now. Keep the door open. Keep the thread of texts going, low pressure and consistent. Keep being the person who shows up, even when showing up right now means being available from a distance. Because that's what I know how to do. I know how to be the one who is simply, reliably there. Even if the people who benefited from it most are still learning to see it clearly. Someday Caleb will be 22, or 25, or 32, and he will have enough distance to look back and understand the shape of those years, to understand what was given and what it cost, to understand who showed up on the hard nights and who called from Dubai on Sundays. I believe that day comes. I'm keeping the door open until it does. If you have ever been the one who stayed, who put your own plans on hold, who absorbed the hard work and the hard nights, who built something real for someone else, and then been told it was nothing, leave a comment below. You are not invisible, even when the people closest to you act like you are. If you believe that showing up every day is worth something, that the quiet, unglamorous work of just being there matters more than people admit, hit that like button and subscribe. Because some people will never say thank you out loud, but the ones you did it for, deep down they know. And someday they will say so. #I raised my brother.